Outer space is, to put it mildly, absolutely terrifying. In real life, it is nearly a pure unknown and is hauntingly mysterious. Space is so mysterious, in fact, it feels like literally anything is possible. Science seems to discover some new, horrifying thing we've never seen before every few years. Which is why I think so many people have astrophobia. Astrophobia is the fear of space. And when space is as mysterious as it is, you already know the medium of video games will take full advantage of that fact, and the inclusion of space in games makes any game infinitely more terrifying. Whether horror or any other genre, it doesn't seem to matter. Space makes everything scarier. If you don't already have astrophobia, the games I mention here might just give it to you, because they reveal the terrifying idea of how space might just be in the places we can't see. Things like mind-bending astronomical bodies, nightmare-fuel creatures, and planets that might just be alive. But more on all of that later. So why exactly is space so scary? And why is its inclusion in the medium of video games, especially horror video games, make said game astronomically more terrifying? To understand why, and potentially our place in the universe, let's look at astrophobia in games, and why these games might just be the scariest of all time. It seems almost universally agreed upon that the game Alien Isolation is among the scariest horror games of all time. You can't escape it in lists of the greatest horror games. It is widely considered to be a classic, and I think that's for a reason. Mostly because it's absolutely terrifying on its own, but if we add the fear of space to the mix, we get the most horrifying experience in a video game hands down. It's why Alien Isolation is so scary for people with astrophobia. But we can take this a step further. Alien Isolation is scary on PC, but with the Mother VR mod, it reaches new levels of frightening. Imagine having astrophobia and playing one of the scariest space horror games, one of the scariest games of all time in a virtual reality headset. But we'll get back to that. Alien Isolation is set on Sevastopol Station. We play as Amanda Ripley, the daughter of Ellen Ripley from the 1979 Alien movie. Sevastopol has the flight recordings that will help Amanda track down her mother, so Amanda and the team go to Sevastopol. But the station looks damaged from the exterior, and the communication we receive from Sevastopol is cryptic and filled with static. So we set off to find out what happened. After an explosion knocks everyone off course, we are forced to enter Sevastopol on our own. And eventually, we find out why the place was damaged and abandoned, because an unexpected visitor is on board the station with you. Alien Isolation is an absolute nightmare scenario for anyone with astrophobia, especially when you get introduced to it. The alien hunting you down has a horrifying Geiger-inspired design and chases you throughout the station. The experience of progressing is a cat and mouse game where the alien can be absolutely anywhere. The alien itself has immaculate AI. You can never predict its movements, and it's pretty much impossible to trick it. But by far the scariest part of the AI is its ability to learn your patterns. If you've been hiding in lockers a lot of the game, the alien will pick up on that and start checking out lockers more often. One by one, all of your options for hiding run dry as the alien gets smarter. In this way, the alien's different for everyone. Everyone gets their own custom look at what the alien's patterns are like, because it's a direct reflection of the person playing. It adds an extra layer of terror as slowly all of your safe havens are avoided in fear the alien has already learned about it. Pattern recognition is one of the many things that makes the xenomorph so scary. It doesn't feel like an AI, it feels like a dangerous organic life form capable of intelligence. Sometimes the alien will be in the vents, sometimes it'll be in the hallways. Other times you'll be paranoid by the mere suggestion that it might be somewhere around you. You might audibly hear the alien rip apart other survivors in the distance. Sharing a room with this thing when you're unsure of how effective your hiding spot will be is so scary, it makes you want to jump out of your hiding spot with your eyes closed and your audio turned off just to end it sooner. The game also never fails to remind you of its location. The setting of a dying space station orbiting an extraterrestrial planet completely separate from any other station or ship. It's a completely hopeless scenario. At least for horror games set on Earth, you can kind of tell that safety lies just outside of whatever terrifying place you're in. But on Sevastopol, you get a fervent feeling that outside here is even worse than inside. Every once in a while, you'll see a window to the cosmos, reminding you that there is absolutely no escape, and your hope is drained even more. This all works even better with the VR mod for Alien Isolation. The Mother VR mod takes the already incredibly scary game and cranks it up to 11. Checking corners with your real head, turning around quickly to make sure nothing's following you, ducking under tables and watching the alien walk past, or worse yet, detect you. VR also makes those moments of dread when looking out a window even more significant. Often, you won't have time to look out of the window and appreciate the despair of your situation because you're constantly getting hunted. But in the occasional moment when you can safely look out onto the colossal planet you're trapped next to, and then into the stars, you feel the hopeless nature of the cosmos, and then get back to being terrified by the alien. It doesn't surprise me whatsoever that one of the scariest video games of all time just so happens to be set in space. But there are other space VR games that impart a similar feeling. Maybe not in the horror genre, but still give a feeling of dread. Remember that spacewalk section from earlier in Alien Isolation? What if you took that and made it into a VR game? Have you ever imagined how horrifying going on a spacewalk would be? Tethered by a cord as your only lifeline protecting you from the depths of space. Now, what if we took off that cord? This is a photo of the first untethered spacewalk performed by astronaut Bruce McCandless. It's a dreadful image of a man floating in space, just above the Earth, completely free from any tethers. I can only imagine what it would be like, seeing your ship get farther and farther away as you drift slowly into the infinite cosmos. I can't tell if that would be meditative or terrifying. Maybe a little bit of both. I can't shake the feeling when looking at this image of how unstable your surroundings are. You're only one jetpack malfunction away from drifting into the void and never returning. There was a moment in the game Lone Echo that was exactly like this for me. At one point, I drifted too far away from safety and into the void, and it was weirdly mesmerizing. But first, let me introduce you to the game itself. Lone Echo, for starters, is a VR game, and it was one of the first VR games that really wowed people. It's still among my favorites of all time, and it has this effect while being 7 years old, which in VR terms is pretty much ancient times. Lone Echo is set in the far future. You play as an Echo unit, a sort of robot named Jack, operating aboard the Kronos 2 station orbiting Saturn. The entire station completely lacks gravity, and the movement is unlike anything you'd see in other VR games. I spent a solid 20 minutes just playing in zero gravity. Little did I know this zero gravity would soon be the thing that would send me away from the only safe haven I had. The game's first moment of astrophobia, and one of the most striking in any VR game I've played, was opening the station and seeing the monolithic planet of Saturn for the first time. First, the scattered asteroids around it, then the rings, and finally, the planet at the heart of it all. Looking down at those rings, knowing each one is double, triple the size of you, and then back up at the stunning and terrifying planet that lie at the center, really gives you a sense of scale. After a conversation with Olivia, the resident captain of the Kronos 2 station, a cut appears on the surface of Saturn with no links to anything within the Atlas database. Atlas being the megacorporation that owns the Kronos 2 station. Whatever this thing is, it's a true anomaly. Eventually, the anomaly gets bigger, and it's decided that you must go near it in order to scan it for yourself to get a read on what it even is. After that goes horribly wrong, you must complete a series of repairs. Doing spacewalks isn't something rare in space media, not even in video games. But here, in VR, physically completing tasks while the vacuum of space lay behind me, I almost couldn't look at it. I had to hold on to whatever I was repairing at all times in fear I'd drift away and somehow not be able to come back. There was something about being in VR and doing a spacewalk that made me feel so vulnerable. Every once in a while, I'd turn my head and see the void staring through me, and quickly get back to whatever it was I was doing. It's a real testament to the power of VR. Just pressing buttons to do tasks isn't enough, at least not for me. Holding on for dear life to a ship and using my other hand to do a repair is just something that can't be recreated in any other medium. And it's why, the moment I faced my fears and let go of the one vessel keeping me from the vacuum of space was so powerful. I jumped to an asteroid that was below the rings of Saturn and got a look at the underside of the planet for the first time. It was completely dark. It looked almost like a black hole from where I was. I held onto the boulder and thought about going back, but didn't. I let go and let myself drift untethered to anything. And there I was, below the rings of Saturn, floating. It was at this moment I made a realization. something I never felt with any other space game I've played. Most space games are set in the far future. This usually means you have a robotic, futuristic AI voice talking to you, or you're in a loud ship with thrusters. But out here, in VR, under the rings of Saturn, it was so quiet. Space is so quiet. When you peel behind all of the noise happening in sci-fi media, this is how space really is. Silent. Gene Cernan, the commander of the Apollo 17 mission and the current last man on the moon, once said, "The mass gross absence in space is more than just silence." And I couldn't agree more. Not that it was anything like how silent space really is, but it gave me some perspective. Floating out there in complete silence with nothing to distract me. Eventually I looked up and saw the Earth, the tiny ball in the distance. It didn't look too dissimilar from one of the uncountable number of stars I saw all around me. And I just thought to myself, that's where everything is? That's where all of human history is? Hovering in the cosmos in Lone Echo gave me existential dread more than direct fear. If you look at the Earth from the real-life Saturn, it's even smaller. This photo was taken by NASA. Some of you may already recognize it. It's a photo called "The Day the Earth Smiled." Do you see it? I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but on the bottom left corner of Saturn, what could be confused as a speck of dust on the lens is visible. And that's us. The image is called "The Day the Earth Smiled" because it's the first image of the Earth from this distance that people were actually posing for, because the public was given notice on exactly when it would be taken. And I couldn't help but think about this image, suspended above the stars, looking at our pale blue dot. Lone Echo isn't a game focused directly on astrophobia or making you fear space. If you really pay attention, it's a game that produces astrophobia through the existential dread of looking at how unimportant we really are, and the horrors of being alone in space. It seems loneliness is a main theme in many space games, horror and non-horror. Lone Echo can feel lonely, sure, but you always have someone talking to you, at least most of the time. In Alien Isolation, despite the name, you're not alone most of the time. There are other survivors aboard Sevastopol, no matter how hostile. But what if you had a horror game set in space that was a completely lonely experience, with not an ounce of humanity in it? Have you ever wondered whether the planets in the universe are alive? It's a weird question, I know. But could you imagine the horror of being a planet? The horrors of being conscious for billions of years, looking at the same slice of the cosmos for basically eternity, being struck by asteroids 24/7, all while having no idea what you're even doing there. Well, the indie game Voyager-19 is all about that exact question. In Voyager-19, you are an astronaut on a claustrophobic shuttle with the goal of taking pictures of planets and listening to their signals on a radio in the hopes of finding habitable planets. But this isn't your only mission. In Voyager-19, you have a much more sinister and mysterious task to complete. More on that later. You are commissioned for 7 missions across multiple different star systems that each require multiple years of hibernation to get to. Every hibernation period, your ship becomes more decayed as the radiation from space slowly takes a toll on your spacecraft. The planets begin by looking normal enough, but they sound so unsettling. As mentioned earlier, you have a radio on your ship that allows you to listen to the various frequencies of these planets. Science often does the same thing in real life, and real planets often sound very unsettling. Here's an example. The radio mechanic is not only realistic, but unique. I've never seen a game that focuses a lot of its horror on what space sounds like instead of what it looks like. Some of the signals from these planets sound like screams of help, others sound like groaning, others sound like they're trying to replicate music but fail in such a creepy way. The game is also a visual nightmare. The planets are normal, at least at the start, but the further you get into the game, the weirder the planets begin to look. The middle of the game will have you looking at highly saturated planets. Further into the game, you come across planets that appear to be hollow, dotted with holes, not even resembling planets anymore. The more you continue, the more questions you begin asking. At some point, you take a picture of a planet, only to see a mysterious looking moon of some kind in the background. When you take another picture, it's gone. You slowly start coming to the realization that whatever this moon thing is, it's following you. You get the feeling you're being watched, but by who or what, you have no idea. Then you come across another grayed out planet. This one doesn't have any holes, but when you point your radio at it, this is the sound it makes. If it wasn't already obvious, it's the sound of a heartbeat. Now you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that these planets are alive. Not just alive, but following you. But like alien isolation, the hopelessness of the situation lies in the universe itself. Now you know this information, but what can you do with it? What could you possibly do to get yourself out of this situation? The universe is your captor, and your jail cell is an infinite expanse. This is when your secondary mysterious mission makes sense. Your second mission is to investigate what happened to the Magella science expedition before the public is told they've deviated from their course and cut communications. You find the ruins of their spacecraft completely torn apart and mangled. Maybe the thing following you is the same thing that did this. You recover some files from the decayed vessel and decrypt them one by one whenever you take a trip to a new system. The last file tells of the snapping turtle, using its tongue to mimic a worm in order to lure in fish, foreshadowing for what's coming next. You continue on to the last planet. It's one that looks habitable. That is, until the planet begins opening up. Until it doesn't even resemble a planet anymore, and you become its prey. The game poses a lot of questions. What are these planets feeding on? Why are they alive? What hunts them? What would happen if one were to stumble across Earth? The game perfectly embodies the fear of the unknown. We don't know a lot about outer space, it's still very much a mystery to us. And when something is mysterious, anything is possible. Even planets using habitability to lure in conscious prey. The fear of planets in outer space is a central theme in Voyager-19, but it's also a central theme in another game, just in a different way. One that makes you get a lot more up close and personal with the planets of the universe. There will be no story spoilers for the game Outer Wilds in this next section, just some relatively early game locations most people can get to within an hour of playtime, and I also won't talk about the DLC. You're submerged in deep water. Colossal tornadoes throw land masses out of the sickly green atmosphere of a large planet and into the depths of outer space, only for them to come back down and crush the water beneath them. You hope to not be picked up by one, but of course, you eventually are. The tornado swirls you out of the atmosphere and into the void. There you are, with nothing more than a jetpack, observing the immense green planet you just departed from. And all you can think about is the fact that there are 8 more of these to explore. This is a situation many people find themselves in the game Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds is an open-world mystery game set in a dynamic star system. The planets of Outer Wilds trigger astrophobia in every sense of the word. Obviously, since it's set in space, it would naturally be a bit uncomfortable for anyone with astrophobia, but unlike other space games, the fear of space doesn't end at the setting itself. When you first start Outer Wilds, you're on your home planet of Timber Hearth. Timber Hearth is your only safe place in this uncaring universe, and the Hearthian village is a perfect starting setting for the game. As you talk to the various Hearthians around your village, the concept of flying into space is built up more and more. Some saying it's unsafe, some encouraging it, and some saying the wooden launch pad will probably kill you. This all culminates into one of my favorite moments in the whole game, your first space flight. Every experience you've had talking to the Hearthians all leading up to you finally launching your ship. The planet I described at the very beginning is called Giant's Deep, and when you first wake up on your home planet, it's the first planet you see, which is why so many people go to it first. Giant's Deep is subtle, not revealing itself unless you're brave enough to dive headfirst into its atmosphere. At least with the other planets you can tell what they are, but Giant's Deep doesn't reveal its secrets until after you've taken the risk of entering it. The concept of an ocean planet is already a scary thought. Thalassophobia is the fear of the ocean, but at least our oceans are in our home planet. What could be in the oceans of a place like Giant's Deep? Since I couldn't find a name for this specific fear, I created my own. Oceanus Alienophobia, the fear of bodies of water on other planets. And we're just getting started. I don't even think Giant's Deep is the scariest planet out of the bunch. The scariest planet in the game, in my opinion, is Brittle Hollow. Brittle Hollow looks normal from a bird's eye view, but what isn't shown when initially looking at it is what's below it. The majority of Brittle Hollow is under the surface of the planet. As the name suggests, the place is hollow. One of the scariest moments I had in Outer Wilds was figuring out why it was hollow. The fear of space itself isn't all too common, but it's at least for me more understandable than the hyper-specific fear known as melanoheliophobia, the irrational fear of black holes. I can confidently say that above all else I have this phobia. For me at least, it isn't even the concept of getting ripped apart by it that scares me. Just looking at it is so intimidating. After I had flown my ship through a crack in the ground, I was met with the sight of a black hole in the center. And it just so happens that some things you need to explore are down in the depths of Brittle Hollow. Exploring the planet is a constant fight to not fall into the void of its core. You have no idea what'll happen if you accidentally fall down, so you're constantly on edge. Another fear that Outer Wilds exemplifies is something called astromegalophobia, the fear of large objects in space. The aforementioned Giant's Deep is definitely an example of this, launching you into space until the entire planet covers your vision. Standing on certain planets close to the sun at the center of the system makes the star look absolutely gigantic. All in all, Outer Wilds is definitely an example of a non-horror game being a horrifying experience. Astrophobia is abundant in the mysterious and unknowable nature of the star system. As soon as you've encountered something like the black hole at the center of Brittle Hollow once, you're gonna realize that each planet probably has its own quirk that might be either cool or scary. Maybe you'll dread the experience of coming across another Brittle Hollow or Giant's Deep if you have astrophobia, or maybe you're the type to actively seek these scary space experiences out and get excited about what surprises await you. But of course, you can't get to these planets without your ship. It's been said in various interviews with the developers that the ship was meant to be a safe haven for the player in a hostile universe, much like a portable version of your starting planet. But if you're not careful, your ship tends to leave you because of the dynamic nature of the star system. The first time I got caught in the oceans of Giant's Deep after my ship left me, I had no idea what could be below me in those murky waters, or what would be in store for me if one of those tornadoes flung me into space. The world of Outer Wilds is a scary, hostile place where nothing can be certain. All I can say is it's definitely going on the list of non-horror games that have made me more frightened than actual horror games. But I suppose space doesn't have to be all that scary. Space can be beautiful at times, I can't deny that. Seeing large planets illuminated by their stars in Elite Dangerous, or even real-life images taken by various space telescopes, images of space can have a strange beauty to them. I want to tell you about the most beautiful space game I've ever played, and why nearly everyone that has played it hates it. The concept of the game Adrift is simple. You are an astronaut named Alex Oshima, the only survivor of a disaster that a space station orbiting Earth endured. Your only goal is to find your way home. The game communicates the fear of space more in the situation than the visuals themselves. When I was younger, I always wanted to become an astronaut, and many people who were my age likely thought the same. Adrift turns this innocent idea on its head. The horror of Adrift comes from the terrifying situation you're in. We have protocol for disasters like severe tornadoes, hurricanes, even nuclear bombs. But when you're floating in the depths of space, with a destroyed space station, what are you even supposed to do? What's the protocol? It's the sheer hopelessness of your situation in Adrift that makes it such a great example of astrophobia. In space, all our rules and regulations fall apart. You're not in society, not in civilization, you're not even on Earth. Floating in a tin can far above the world. And that's weirdly beautiful. The reviews for Adrift are mixed, and a lot of people really don't like the game. Many fully despise it. But something even people who hate the game can agree on is just how beautiful it is. Adrift is mesmerizing, stunning, it's absolutely breathtaking. I'll get into why people hate it so much a little later. Despite being one of the scariest environments and one of the scariest situations a human can be in Adrift, all I could do was take in the view. The Earth under you is massive. It takes up your entire vision when you look at it, and it's surprisingly accurate to the real thing. But the view of Earth was always fleeting. You see, in Adrift, you have a limited amount of oxygen, but this oxygen is also your fuel source. In order to move around, you must concede to having less breathable oxygen. You refill your oxygen by finding these bottles around the ship. Because your propulsion is your lifeline, you don't often boost around, meaning 90% of the time you're adrift in the cosmos without any propulsion. Whenever you need to make it to a specific mission marker, there's usually always a way for you made up of parts of the vessel. These pieces of broken vessel are usually the safest route and also dotted with oxygen. But there's always a second way, if you're daring. Your suit is especially fragile, so when exposed to the depths of space, your oxygen trickles down a lot faster than when you're in a semi-intact part of the station. Which is why taking the risky route is so dangerous, but promises to get you to your destination swiftly. And more importantly, it allows you to take in the view of our little blue dot. There are no voices to keep you company in Adrift, besides the occasional communication with mission control. When you are floating in space, you are truly the farthest human away from any other human. And there's a strange comfort to that. Upon seeing the Earth from space, many astronauts claim to have a realization that life is just so fragile and insignificant that we all ought to get along. This is what's known as the overview effect. When you see Earth as a bigger picture, all borders fade away. You don't see warring nations or politics or disputes and disagreements, all you see is us. the only known planet holding this weird experience of living. I quoted this in a previous video, but I think it applies here. When the astronaut Edgar Mitchell went to the moon and saw Earth as a pale blue dot for the first time, he said,
"From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty."
I won't say I felt the same thing looking at Earth in Adrift, but it did give me a similar feeling. On my fleeting spacewalks, when I was drifting to my next location, I would often look down at the Earth and try to see exactly where I was. I would scour the landmasses and cities lit up at night and play a guessing game for what cities the urban blobs I was looking at actually belonged. It's incredible how much you can see from space. In a single glimpse of the Earth, I look at China, Korea, and Japan in the same view and think about how I'm looking at over 1 billion people. And that's just what they are. People. I didn't see political allegiance or race up there, I saw people. That is, if I was even looking at land in the first place. 70% of the time, I would look down and see an infinite blue ocean. It gave me a perspective of just how much of Earth isn't even available to us. The Earth moves fairly quickly below you, and once Japan had left my sights, I looked to my right, expecting to see the golden coasts of California. But I didn't. In fact, I didn't see it for another 7 minutes. The Pacific Ocean, as small as it looks on flat maps, is gargantuan. There's a point on the Pacific Ocean known as Point Nemo, the farthest place on Earth from any land. So far, that astronauts on the International Space Station are closer to land than someone on Point Nemo. Going over Point Nemo in space was almost ironic. The farthest person from humanity, both on Earth and in space. The shock of seeing Earth from this height is significant. The overview effect allows us to see a reflection of ourselves. It tells us so much about the reality we live in. Ed White was the first ever American to take a spacewalk. He was attached by a 23-foot tether and a 25-foot umbilical circling the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour, going a total of 6,500 miles around our planet in the 20 minutes he was out there. And when he climbed back into the Gemini capsule, he spoke the words of one of the first human beings to be enlightened by the globe.
"I'm coming back in, and it's the saddest moment of my life."
Adrift made me feel this way when it was all over. I had spent the whole game fighting to get home, but when I look down on Earth from that distance, all I think is, I want to be suspended here for a little longer. Not forever, just a little while. So maybe I can understand the world a bit better. This is why I love Adrift. Despite the desperation and horrifying circumstances, I still found hope in humanity through the cosmos, no matter how pretentious that sounds. Astrophobia gives us perspective, not just about how small we are, but how we may change for the better because of that smallness. And yet, people still hate the game. Not to call them wrong or anything, I can 100% see why a pretty view of Earth wouldn't be enough to justify the purchase of a game. But the biggest complaint about the game, to quote a comment on Steam, it's 10 minutes of game, stretched to 3 hours by making you float slowly. I don't want to sound like a contrarian here, but ironically, that's what I enjoyed most about the game. Floating slowly and looking down at Earth was why I finished it. Admittedly though, the gameplay itself can be boring and lackluster at times, but it can have its moments. The fact that the Earth is beautiful doesn't overshadow the game's astrophobia completely. It's still very prevalent. At one point, I was going to my next destination on a risky, danger-ridden path, when I got caught on the solar panels of a spinning part of the station that had been ripped away, but somehow I escaped. However, I wasn't fast enough to leave my dire situation, and got swept up once again, this time slipping inside of a crack between the solar panels and getting stuck. Now I was panicking. I attempted to use oxygen to propel myself, but it was no use. I was completely stuck and losing oxygen quickly. In a panic, I rolled my body towards the nearest exit point, now losing oxygen rapidly. I kept rolling until I made it out. But my oxygen was low, dangerously low. I spotted a bottle of O2 in the distance and made a beeline for it, being careful not to use too much of my oxygen as propulsion. 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds of oxygen remaining, and I made it. Space shows no mercy. I was lucky enough to escape its grasps. But it was still amazing to me that in a situation as hostile as that, I was able to find some semblance of hope when seeing our planet's cradle in the infinite blackness. Space is the one thing everyone can fear no matter what part of this ball they're from, and I suppose it brings us together in that way. It was ironic that out there alone in space, I was more connected to humanity than I had been in any other game. The Final Frontier is one of desolation and several horrors. I'm sure you've heard the famous quote plaguing the generation we live in. Born too late to explore the Earth, born too early to explore the stars. It's through these games, and many others I haven't even mentioned, Now we can get a new perspective on what the exploration of the universe may actually look like. In the year 2200, maybe we'll have vast stations orbiting Saturn, or be capable of traveling to various star systems, and maybe in our pursuit of knowledge, we might find things that we deem unsettling. The numerous new space discoveries that could supposedly end the world. Giant asteroids, strange matter, the numerous potential ways the Higgs boson could end our universe. And yet we keep searching for knowledge in the stars, because there's a compulsion to do so, no matter how scary the results may be. It's this innate desire for knowledge, no matter the consequences, that pushes humanity forward. In Voyager-19, we send an unknown person into a tin can and tell them to find habitable planets and survey planets to gain knowledge about them. Outer Wilds is a game all about solving a mystery and gaining knowledge. Lone Echo is about investigating an anomaly, so maybe it will no longer be anomalous. Space games, no matter how scary, seem to always have one central human theme: the pursuit of knowledge. And it seems no matter what horrors we find in the stars, it will always be met with more curiosity than fear. Because that's just how we are, and I hope that's how we'll stay. For it is through illuminating the darkness of the universe that we find our place, no matter how many terrors the light of knowledge illuminates alongside it.